Welcome to Parenting Unfiltered, a Parents Lead podcast. We bring expert guidance and simple real-life tools to help you support your child's behavior health. I'm your host, Sara Kapp, and today we welcome Dr. Shauna Eberhardt, a clinical leader who brings a personal and professional perspective to what helps kids thrive at home. She blends research with real-life routines that families can actually keep, and we'll talk screen time guardrails, why sleep shapes behavior, and easy winter rhythms that support emotional health. Shauna, you bring both a clinical lens and a parental perspective. What are you seeing right now, especially with young kids, with sleep, screen times, and big feelings as winter sets in?
Oh gosh. So there's so much going on right now. I think during this time of year, we've got daylight savings, we have holidays, you've got, school that is just kids have just started to get into the routine of all of that. And so I feel like this whole time of year is just transitions. And so I think, one of the things that I've had to learn as a parent, but also that I've talked to clients that I've worked with in the past is really, you have to have some kind of mantra that will really help that self-talk and help get you through and understand that you don't have to be perfect. This is not a time for perfection. There is no such thing as a perfect parent, and so it's grant yourself grace, practice forgiveness. If you have to make, easy mac one night for supper because you didn't get home from basketball practice until 9 p.m. and your kid hasn't eaten until that time, that is okay. I feel like, the hustle and bustle of today's world, routines are important, but forgiveness, grace. I mean, it is never going to be perfect every single day. We're never going to be able to, be up at the exact same time and doing the exact same things. And that's okay. That's life. Life is messy. And I think that also teaches our kids though, too, that it's okay to kind of live in the messy sometimes. So I think with daylight savings, we do recognize that, it's getting darker earlier. And so I think sometimes, those bedtime routines are off. I know my kids are like that. And so, I think it's really determining what works best for your family. And so where is the balance? Where are the things? Holiday gatherings, one of the things, know your kid too, so if you have a child like mine, I raised 2 introverts, they really need downtime during the holiday gatherings, right? Because there's so many people, so much going on. And so we just give them permission to say, if you need 10 minutes outside to gather yourself, we're teaching our children skills, and those are life skills that they're going to use, all throughout life. So all that's really important.
Yeah, I really appreciate when you talk about parenting isn't perfect. I think especially with what social media tells us now, you look on there and you see these perfectly posed families with everything lined up and so perfect. And I'm far from that. And so there's nights when we come home and cereal is what it is for supper.
100%.
And it's hard to be parents, especially in this day and age with social media to keep up. And so while I guess I understand, routine is important too, but just having that realization that it doesn't have to be like that every single day. So what would you say too, as kids are younger, from young toddler all the way up to middle school to college age, of what transitions look like as for bedtimes or putting screens away before bed, and what might that look like
Sure.
depending on your age?
I think so. Screen time is just a hot topic right now. And so is social media, I think, as a whole. And so, social media, I think the important thing to recognize with social media and some of the harm that, it can do for children, not just the screen time itself, but the content, and so like you said, if I'm a child and I'm in my development and trying to figure out who I am, and I'm looking and I'm seeing, this sort of perfect picture of what something looks like, that really changes my self-image, and it really changes a lot about that. And so I think that's an important conversation, to have with kids. And then that screen time in general too, when everything in life is balanced. So I feel like, for children that are, it's really tempting, right? It's especially in North Dakota, right? It gets 30 below, it's cold. What are we going to do? And so it's really easy to kind of use screen time, I think, but it's important to balance out screen time too with other family activities. And I think that there's sort of a misconception too with parents that taking away that social media, or it's going to create this, discord in a relationship. And so I think it's important to have conversations, set parameters, but then also look at, if you take an hour out of your time, in the evening to do something together as a family, and it doesn't have to be a big, expensive trip out or anything like that, but taking the time to read a book, play a board game, something like that, you'll find that your child will start to integrate those things into the routine, look forward to it, and it becomes less and less about the screen. So I think it is a little bit of that, trying to find balance that works for your family. And like I said, it's not going to be perfect. You have a big drive home from a football game that's 2 hours away. That's probably a really nice time to have the iPad for your child. And then it's, when we get home, like, what does the bedtime routine look like? What is, how do we kind of take that time then to settle away from the screen to recoup?
Sure. And as you said earlier, when kids are really affected by social media and, especially what they're seeing, and I have a young child who's 9, who's really understanding and learning about her body and stuff. Do you see a lot of kids really trying to wean in on what they see on social media and think that that's perfection? And then how do you talk to kids about that?
So I think one thing is parents, I think, educate yourselves on social media significantly, because a lot of the things that I didn't even know this until really recently, but like the way that social media is made is that you are actually not in the position of consumer. You are the product. And so what it is that, let's say Instagram, for example, or Facebook, or, any of those really popular apps where I'm putting out pictures and things like that. They're really built on how many times that somebody interacts with those posts. And so I think about like Snapchat is another really good one, right? The streaks. So I have my husband even, he's like, oh, you didn't continue my streak. And I'm like, what? I'm married to you. Like, why do I have a ongoing picture thing with you? You're in the other room. But these are the things that put pressure, on kids. And so I think it's like that pressure to fit in, the pressure to post, the pressure to, do all of those things and then to look a certain way. So, and I think it's just really having a conversation about what do you want from a friendship? Like, what do you want in a healthy relationship? Is it however many likes that you have, or is it a quality friendship with a person that you enjoy spending time with? And so I think it's just differentiating out too for kids and for parents, and recognizing that, social media can be a great platform for connections, but it's not that depth, of connection that a lot of kids really, really need to be able to continue to learn and develop in relationships.
Yeah, I really like how you talk about how it's okay for kids to use screens. It's inevitable.
Right. Yes.
Regardless, they're getting younger and younger, even in school now. They're having iPads versus old school books like you and I probably had.
Yes.
So they come home with iPads and I don't even know how to work them. But how do you really incorporate that into, as they are younger now, how do you make sure that it is balanced and they stay healthy? And how do you put those limits on, especially as they're younger, and you kind of navigate how often they are on screens?
Yeah, I think, and I'll say this always with, it's always unique to the family. You have to kind of find out what works for your family, but I'll give a couple examples. So my daughter, I have a 12-year-old and I have a 24-year-old. So our 12-year-old though is sort of just, hitting that age. And so she found Pinterest, I think was her first introduction to social media. And it was like, kind of starting out like, oh, I'm looking at all these things. And then it got to be a little bit like, oh, is this a little bit of like, am I enhancing consumerism? Because she's like, I want my house to look like this. And so we really had a conversation too about like, how you are utilizing the media and how are you, finding balance and other things too. And kids, depending on their developmental age, right? Like they're not just going to be able to intellectualize those things. And so it really is up to us then as parents to kind of set some of those limits. And so one of the things that we did too was we just said, hey, it's a negotiation. All right. So I'm going to say, I think that this is a reasonable limit. And she would be like, okay, but what about Saturdays? Right. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe Saturdays, if, you agree to do the dishes or something, then it's like a, kind of a downtime activity for her. And then we also have lists of different activities. And so if she's bored, trying to find something else that's maybe a little bit different so that she is away. And I'll tell you, it's kind of funny because my 24-year-old now, I can be right again because I'm a mom and she's outgrown that age. But I think for a long time it was like, oh, why are you, imposing all of these rules and things like that? And she said, you know what, I want to thank you for that, because back then she didn't recognize how much it impacted her mood. And then once she kind of was able to put away the screens, and she doesn't have any social media anymore, which was a choice she made, on her own, just to kind of recognize that it wasn't good for her mental health.
That's really great that she was able to recognize that.
Yeah.
Probably with good boundaries, that were put into place too, where she wasn't restricted, because a lot of times I think too, we see that when kids are super restricted from everything, they try to
Yes.
access means, whether it's social media or anything, they try to get
Yes.
access anywhere. So having those healthy boundaries with the social media really helped, I'm sure.
Yes. Yeah. And just conversations about it, like even reflecting, what is it, how do you feel now that you've been on on there for a while, or has you noticed any impact, to your mood or anything like that? And so we did try to like open up conversations to keep track of that for our kids. And I think that helped them to just create that self-awareness, which kids need, because we're not always going to be around to set those limits. They're going to have to learn to do that themselves, but we do have to do it for a while.
Yeah. And just having those conversations, like you said, of open, honest conversations, let them ask questions. I'm sure, one thing we always talk about too is role modeling.
Yes.
And so when we're on our cell phones, I try to put mine away from dinner time to bedtime. So I'm not perfect, as we know, but try to put them away. So then when we're present with them, we're actually really present versus on our cell phones. So when they see it, then that's what they expect and we'll do in return. So role modeling those good boundaries and having that social media put away, or cell phones, whatever that might look like.
Yeah, well, I've noticed that very much in my youngest daughter. So if she will very much emulate whatever it is that I am doing. And so for a long time, and yeah, I'm definitely not perfect either. So I'll scroll Pinterest every once in a while. And then I'll notice that she'll want to come and kind of hang out and do the same thing. And then I'll be like, well, why don't we put this away? Let's go for a quick walk. And she is all about it, just instantly wants to do that instead. And so it's like, I think, like you said, the more that we're able to model balance too, healthy behaviors. And so if we demonize this thing that's almost, like you said, inevitable in our society, that gets really, really hard. And then it becomes a power struggle between parent and child. And that's never helpful at all. So it is one of those, kind of pick your battles, but model, really what you would like to see.
Absolutely. So let's say your child is, they're asking for their screens more. They're wanting to be on your phone or on YouTube or any social media access. What might that look like? And how might you try to slowly, gradually decrease their usage?
Think if you're noticing that your child has been using media, pretty significantly for a long time. I think one of the things you can do is gamify a little bit. That's a fun way to sort of have a challenge for a child, and children will really, sort of gear towards those types of things. And so I'll give you a good example. This couple summers ago, actually, we had our niece over and my daughter, and they were, watching cartoons and different things like that for a while. And I was like, oh gosh, they've been on their phones way too long. We need to find something different for them to do. And so we just downloaded a quick scavenger hunt online. And then I said, okay, you have 2 hours to go find all these things. And then, once you do that, then I think we did it like a pizza or something like that. It was fun. And so she loved it. It was such a hit. They absolutely had a great time going out, finding all these random things, came back, they were just having a lot of fun with it. And then we kind of just reflected on that. It was like, oh my gosh, you were on the phones for a really long time. And then it seems like you really loved doing this. And they were like, yes, let's do it again. So I think it's sometimes it's a little bit of creativity. It's a good distraction, I think, to find, some kind of replacement activity that can go in there. So, and then it's okay to have those conversations again about limits, to say, hey, I noticed that when you only spent that hour, and then you did something else, you were a much happier person. And that goes a long way. Kids recognize that.
Absolutely. So what might it look like for, I think we've all been in the checkout line at the grocery store, and our kids are 4 or 5, they're kicking and screaming on the floor. And then as soon as you offer your iPad or your phone or something, they instantly stop. And so what might that look like when you can tell that it's gone too far, that child is really becoming dependent on the tablet or the phones or any kind of social media? What might that look like, especially in early ages?
Yeah. So I think what's really important about this is to recognize that every behavior, we're social creatures. And so we engage in behaviors for reasons. We do it so that there's some kind of outcome. And so a child can learn really early on, hey, if I, absolutely lose it in the grocery store, mom's going to let me watch Bluey. Right. And so, and it's not to say that they're not all little manipulators, but they kind of are a little bit, it's like we all do that. We learn. And so sometimes it's learning then sort of, if you want that behavior to stop, it's helping them to relearn a different behavior. And so it might be instead, what is something that your child really likes to do? They really like coloring, or, so maybe it's like, all right, if you're, good for the grocery store, I'll let you pick out a coloring book, or something that's simple within means, or we can stop by the apple orchard on the way home, like whatever's in your area, whatever, again, kind of matches with your family, but just something that can kind of replace that. And then expect it to go really poorly the first couple times. Because when we're trying to kind of change behavior, oftentimes that will, ramp up. And so if they're used to getting that and all of a sudden we're like, no, we're not going to allow you to have that phone, they may be the mom carrying, and I've been this mom. I have carried my kid out on my shoulder out to the parking lot because, she was throwing a fit. She didn't get a chocolate bar or whatever it was. But yeah, it's trying different things and then just deep breaths because, you'll get through those situations, but they can be really stressful. So just expect a little bit of that pushback.
And most parents have been in our shoes.
Oh,
they've all been there. So I've even had people come up in the grocery store when they're like, bless you. They get it. They get it. So
they do.
As we talk about, social media and being on electronics, how does that really affect how our children's sleep patterns? A lot of times you hear, put your phones away X amount of time before your child goes to bed. And what kind of advice do you have on that?
Yeah. So that's hard too. So if you're a parent like me and you have kids that are in activities and different things, oftentimes the screen time isn't even a thing until almost right before bed, because that's the time when she's finally not busy with whatever. And so what we've had to do, and for other families, again, kind of finding what works for you, but having set times and just to say, okay, you can have downtime. You can choose to spend it how you want to. It could be this, or this. And so what we have found is giving, a choice between you can be on your phone for, a half hour, or you can stay up an extra half hour to read your book. She's going to choose the book every time. So it's kind of nice, but it's a way to give two choices and make one a little bit more desirable than the other, whatever it is that you want. But also balance, and so we'll say it's okay for you to be on your phone for a little bit, but this is the time when it's lights out. We did have a unique challenge though, and this might be, other parents might relate to this too, but so our youngest child always falls asleep listening to audio stories. And so she listens to, Harry Potter or whatever it is that she's wanting to listen to. And so we were like, okay, well, she needs to have her phone in there, right? So we got creative instead because, of course she was like, well, I'm not going to be on my phone, Mom. And I'm like, oh yeah, right. You can never trust your kids. No, I'm just kidding. But really, she doesn't have the capacity at this age to really make that decision. And so it would be tempting in the middle of the night. And so to remove that temptation, we just did a Bluetooth speaker. And so her phone is actually out in the other room and she has her Bluetooth speaker. She can still listen to her book. It's on a timer, and then when it's off, it's off. And hopefully she's asleep by then. But
and everyone wins.
Yeah. And everyone wins. So she still got her audiobook, but we were able to find a way to not have that temptation right there. So
yeah, I think sometimes as parents too, we get so headstrong on our own thoughts and beliefs that we forget to find an alternative solution like that too. So it's great that you can work together. I'm sure you had some conversations of what might work for her and we're able to make it work. So
yes,
that's great. In plain language, how does sleep really shape our emotional regulation in young children?
Oh gosh, sleep is 100% essential. So if you think about, the basics of all human needs, right? We've got sleep, we have, safety, we have food and clean water and love. Those are kind of the core things that we all need to thrive. And coffee, if you're me. But for all of that, I think it's really important to recognize that it is a basic need. And so, to be able to develop healthy sleep patterns starts right away, when we're young. And so, and everybody, has sort of their own circadian rhythm that is, we're built that way. That's just how we are as human beings. But there's a lot of things that can get in the way in that. And so, sometimes, so for example, if you have a parent that you're a night shift parent, and then you're on a completely opposite schedule, that can be really hard for you. It can be hard for the kids. It's hard to kind of, make sure to develop those things. So, starting really early on, one of the things that's important is to, again, find out what works for your family. And so, but develop some really simple tasks that have to be completed right before bedtime. And so it could be, brushing the teeth. Maybe it's picking out the outfit for tomorrow. I went through that phase of letting my, 3-year-old pick out an outfit, and it was interesting, but it turned out. And so those little things can kind of always it gets us into a repetitive pattern that helps us develop a routine that will calm our minds. And then again, everybody is unique too. So if there are some extra things that you might need to do to be able to just recoup, get ready for bed. There are some really great resources out there. I know that we found a couple different mindful meditations just right on our Apple Music. They're free, which is awesome. You can just access those. That was like it's actually a mindfulness exercise that takes the child into this, calming place. It walks them through deep breathing exercises. It was great. And that helped tremendously, like with our routine. But there are, there are children's books about yoga, doing bedtime yoga. There are, maybe you get to have like 20 minutes of hyper time and then you get to calm down. But I think, the main thing is developing, small habits, because those go a long way and will carry you throughout adulthood. So,
yeah, I know at Parents Lead, we have a lot of different mindful activities that we preach to parents and caregivers to just utilize, even if it's on a weekly basis. Just slowly transitioning and getting those activities built into your routine can really play a huge benefit. And so being able to find like a routine that works for your family, I think is always critical too. Like you mentioned, I really appreciate how you continue to say what works for your family, because your family and my family are probably
100%.
Different.
Yep.
And so being able to recognize what works and what doesn't work, and then shifting your schedule for bedtime, for social media time or anything like that. And so I really appreciate you always going back to that and recognizing that all families are different and it looks
100%.
different for everybody. So what's one routine that really pays off the best in the long run? And I know, like you said, you're a mom of a few children.
Yep.
And so it might look different, but if you could do one thing, easiest thing that you could do to help transition your kids to bedtime, what might that be?
I think if you're going from no routine to some routine, taking incremental steps. So it's really hard for kids and for us, for that matter, for any human, to go from one set of behaviors to a completely different set of behaviors. So small changes over time is really where it's at. I think, trying to go from, we've been, living a traveling family. We've been doing all these, different things. And then we go and we are in now a regimented school hours and a regimented job and things like that. That is a huge transition for anybody to make. Right. And so I think the biggest thing is, whether or not it's like, okay, every night at 8:00 is the time when we all, get together and we talk about our day. And then from there, we transition into, our own separate routines. And so maybe it's brushing the teeth, like I said, or reading a book for a half hour or whatever it is that works. Maybe you're allowing a little bit of gaming time right before bed, but again, keeping those limits and keeping firm to them, is important as well. And so consistency, I think that the building of the small things over time, and as we continue to reinforce those things, our bodies become more accustomed to that. And so it's even like, if your bedtime has been, 2:00 in the morning for, months on end, and you try to switch it to 9:00, that's going to be really hard. So maybe it's like, I'm going to transition for an hour ahead of that time for a couple weeks and then see how that goes. And then an hour back from there. So I think it's the buildup of small things that make the biggest difference.
So if you want to completely change we had horrible bedtime routines when our kids were little. They slept in our beds all the time. And then we still struggle at 7 and 9 now. So if I wanted to make sure to get them from our bed to their bed, taking those little steps is what you're saying, versus here's your bed, now go sleep in there.
Yes. Well, especially you might have a child with, there are some children that really have those attachment, challenges. I am the parent of one of those children. So I was definitely, I giggle because we joke about it a little bit now, because when she was younger, I'd be laying next to her and stuff, and we'd listen to her meditation, and then I'd move like a quarter of an inch, and she was like, "Where are you going?" And I'm like, "I'm not going anywhere yet." But it really was like those little transitions, and making it fun. So, okay, if you're sleeping in your bed, you get to wake up in the morning, and we can have, her thing was waffles. We'll make waffles for breakfast if you make it, the whole night or whatever. And then not shaming, so if she came in the middle of the night and she was like, I just can't do it, I want my mommy, or whatever that looked like. Like, okay, we'll try again tomorrow, so you can try again tomorrow for waffles. Like, it's fine. And over time, those things helped her build confidence, helped her, feel safe. And so you do run into that. I mean, every kid is different. Every kid needs a little bit different amount of, parent time and cool down time. And so, yeah, that is okay. It's okay to do that. And it's okay to have, transition times.
So what would you say to those parents who do struggle with that because they want their child to feel heard? They don't want to leave them. If they're saying, Mom, come sleep with me, or you don't love me if you don't sleep with me, or what?
Oh gosh.
Yeah. Yes. We all get that. You don't love me but so how do you make sure that they feel validated in their feelings and you're not just saying, go to sleep, I'll see you in the morning?
Right. Right. Well, and at this point too, like we're exhausted. So I just, again, grant yourself some grace, because I've definitely had those nights where I was like, for the love of everything holy, like, please just go to bed. But I think it is using our skills as parents. And so sometimes it is using those frustration tolerance, and I take a deep breath, go for a quick, I will be with you in 10 minutes. Mom needs 10 minutes, to do whatever. And then coming in and then just saying, it's okay, but here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to bed, and I love you. And just those validation of the emotions. It's okay to feel scared. Everybody feels scared at some point in their life. It's okay to feel, that you're not comfortable in a new place. Maybe that's disrupting the routine. That is okay. We are all made that way. And so some people adjust differently. And so I think just recognizing that it's huge, because what you're doing is you're building resilience, even though you're not trying actively to build resilience, but you're really building children that the skills that they can use for themselves over a lifetime that will help them in tough situations. They'll remember.
I appreciate that, knowing that we can still be parents and we're still teaching them skills in the long run, that even though we say, not tonight.
Yes.
Not tonight. I've got things to do.
Okay.
Mom needs time for, those 10 minutes, and opposite times I'll go back in there because I'll do that. So I'll go in there and check. I'll be back in 10 minutes and fast asleep. So
yeah, we had this last week. She came in and she was like, I'm a little anxious. And I was like, okay. I said, I know you're anxious. I'm like, what can you do? And then we just had that conversation, and she was able to do a couple things, because I said, you know what? I can't I can't come down tonight. I'm exhausted. And that is okay too. So I think, again, you're modeling self-care, so all of it, if you're reframing in that way, it's helping them understand that you have needs as a human as well. And that's important too.
Absolutely. So with North Dakota, we all know the days get short in the winter. So it's dark when we wake up. It's dark almost when we get home from work or school. And so what does that kind of look like? What are 3 to 4 tips that you could really give families on how to adjust your schedule and deal with the darkness?
Yeah, darkness is hard. And so I think that recognizing that we are creatures of the natural world, right? So we are very much influenced by sunlight. We're influenced by, the length of the days, different things like that. And so if you look at, our ancestors, wintertime was really a time of rest, right? So they did, you think about farming and things like that in today's world too. Like, you are out there during the day hours, during those daylight hours, working really hard. And then the wintertime is really that time for downtime and rest and relaxation. So I think, first of all, that's okay. So we don't have to be, rushing and living the daily grind. But there are those of us that work, and kids have school, and there might be some of those things that still are those obligations that still have to happen, but yet it feels like we have the shortened amount of time to be able to do that. So the first thing I'll say is check in with yourself too, and check in with your kids. I can say I am a person who's very influenced by sunlight. There are some conditions actually that seasonal affective disorder is very real. And some people need to go in and get some extra help during this time, and so it might be a conversation with the doctor to say, do I need a little extra help during this time? Am I taking some extra vitamins? Am I making sure that I'm getting sunlight in other ways? There are, sad lamps you can purchase on Amazon for a pretty decent amount. And so making sure that you are doing the things that you need to do to take care of yourself, to be able to kind of be resilient through these times, because it can be really challenging. So I think that's first and foremost, check in with yourself, check in with your kids. But I think then, your routines too, again, they can change. And so you might feel at 5 o'clock at night that like, I am done for the day. Right. And so I do think it is like, are there modifications that you need to make to your routine because you are feeling tired earlier in the day, or your kids, having big emotions closer to bedtime because, it's harder for them during the day. And I think we get the opposite in the summer. I've talked about that before. Kids are like, it's still light at 10 p.m. I'm going to go run around. And so I think it's okay to recognize that there's a difference in that, and be patient with ourselves, be patient with our kids. in that way. But again, if you're needing to kind of make some of those changes, I think it is, again, little things go a long way. So if it's gradually moving up bedtime a little bit because people need to be able to get a little bit of extra sleep during that time, but making sure that they're getting enough, sunlight, enough activity during the day, and you know what's best for your child, right? Like, you're the expert as the parent, and so oftentimes it is kind of getting to know, what are you noticing about your kid's mood? Are they, starting to seem more irritable this time of year, or are they just as filled with energy as they are any other time of year? I mean, every child is very unique. And so I think it's those little things that you can, kind of check in and make small modifications if you need to.
So you talked about checking in as a parent, like checking in on yourself and like the lamps and stuff. Can you use those with kids too, or is it just primarily for adults? And so is that something that you see in your practice that you help parents guide through? Or
yeah, there are a number of different things I think that you can do, but being aware and normalizing, especially for it kind of goes back to modeling, right? Like, if we're taking care of our own mental health, then I think it normalizes it and validates it for our kids. And so if I start to notice that I'm feeling, my mood tanks in the when it gets real dark. And I need that a little bit of extra help. It's just like it is with any other health condition, right? And so if I were to say that, my blood sugar was in a different way and it started to become out of whack, I would go in and I would see my doctor right away and I would make some modifications to my life. That is the same with mental health. And so it's okay to recognize those things. We also, this time of year, if you think about holidays, there could be a lot of people experience loss, right? People experience grief and loss. You may have a hard time around a holiday, or your kids might have a hard time around a holiday. We lost my mom a couple of years ago, and Christmas, they always spent Christmas with Mim. And so the first couple Christmases, my kids were like, this is wrong. And even there was some anger and some, irritability and things that just wasn't the Christmas spirit. And, like, we wanted it to be, right.
Yeah.
And so we just threw it all away. We were like, you know what, we're just going to do Christmas different this year. So we just decided that, we weren't going to hold ourselves to the expectations of having, the Christmas cookies done and the baking done and the, all of the stockings hung and the, on the chimney with glee or whatever. Like, we just decided that wasn't a thing this year. And so we made up some new traditions, and we had a great time. And so it was different, but it was something I think they needed and something I needed. And so I think it is, not holding ourselves to the same expectations just because we've always done it that way. Like, I think it's okay to make changes.
Sure. I think that goes back to our earlier conversation too, especially as the holidays are right around the corner, we're living it. When you go on social media and you see maybe your friends like doing these lavish things, with the fancy pictures and lights and stuff, and maybe that doesn't work for your family. Maybe it's not, because this might be your first holiday, dealing with grief or loss or something, and it's okay to feel those feelings. So how would you kind of talk about too, as you have younger kids, if this is the first holiday and they're dealing with that and they don't really know how to express their emotions or feelings, and how do you kind of recognize those signs that they're struggling, and how do you maybe respond to that?
Yeah, I think safety is first and foremost. And so anytime that somebody is dealing with an emotion, I think sometimes we feel like we should be doing something. And the reality is that most of the time what we need in times of, great distress is simply to know that somebody else is with us. And so your presence might be enough. It might be enough just to sit and hold them for a while. It might be enough just to be next to them, sit quietly, place a hand on their shoulder, just some kind of sign that shows them that you're connected in some way. And I think it's okay, again, like, to ask questions, that, okay, this is something that we've always done. Do you still want to do this? Or, hey, we don't have time this year. But I think it's being able to also develop that flexibility in thinking, right? So we don't have to do something just because we've always done it if it's painful, so it's okay to, take a break, to be able to, recognize that maybe we're not in the best way. And kids react differently, like you absolutely love, the holidays and everything, but maybe they didn't sleep real well, the night before. And so that can impact them too. And just to know that it's okay if they need that break. I think this time of year, the big message is just granting yourself grace, and granting it for your kids too.
And what I heard out of all that too is your presence is enough. Just being present as a family, being together. And maybe that's sitting on the floor watching a Christmas movie or something, or your favorite activity
100%.
Rather than all of the lavish things that you think that you need to be doing, but just spending time together.
And if you're not a holiday person, there's some of them. My husband is one of those. He does different things with the kids. And so it might be that, we're going to go take a drive out and check out this lake or the stars or something like that. That's just totally different, not holiday related, but just something unique where they can still have time together. That is okay too. So I think, recognizing that it's okay to have your own feelings about things. You don't have to live up to whatever expectation is in your head, of what you need to be in the holiday. So that's you all have permission. So
I think everyone appreciates your permission to do that. As we talk about the hustle and bustle of the holidays and just life in general, I mean, year round as parents and caregivers, our lives are usually chaotic. Can you give us like a 1-minute wind down routine for kids, especially like young toddlers or early elementary school, different activities that they can do tonight as they're putting their kids to bed?
Yeah. So one thing that we used to do with both our kids when they were young was your highs and your lows. And so at the end of each day, we would just say, and she, my youngest, would direct it because she's in charge, I guess. But she would always say, tell us your highs and your lows. And she just ended up loving it. And so we would talk about, well, here's, something in my day that didn't go so well, but here's something that went really well or that I enjoyed about my day. And that just sort of was like, in her mind, it just wrapped it up. And then it was time to go to bed and move on to the next thing. So it doesn't have to be something like that, but something simple where you can just sort of wrap up at the end of the day. It could be that you at the end of every day, you read a poem together, or you take a 10-minute walk to the end of your road and back. But just something small that sort of signifies that this is now, the time that we're going to settle in. We're going to get ready for bed, whatever your bedtime routine is. And then we're going to move towards that.
Like you keep saying over and over again, it's different for every family.
Yes.
So I learned real quickly when I became a mom, when my kids started school, they would come home and say, how was your day? Good. What'd you do? I don't know.
Yeah.
But those highs and lows can really like walk through and help them also process. And if things weren't good or maybe they were all good, that it also gives you the opportunity to open up that conversation and dialogue too, to kind of maybe help them problem solve a situation that happened at school or with their friends, or that conflict resolution.
Yes. And we, what was interesting, we had nights though too, where she didn't want to say, and so that was okay too. Like we gave permission. So if that was, I said, what were your highs and lows? And she's like, I just don't really want to talk about it today. I'm like, that's okay. We'll try again tomorrow, but I'm here if you feel like you want to talk about it. So
that's great. That's great. Shauna, what's your message to parents who might feel behind on all the habits? We talked about social media, all of the different things that young kids access nowadays. Right. What's one sentence, especially if we take them into the winter months that are darker, what's one thing that you can leave parents with?
It is never too late. It's never too late to make changes, and it is okay where you're at. And so I think both of those things, we need to be in that state where we're reminding ourselves that life is not what is depicted on social media. Life is not perfect. There is no such thing as that perfect parent. I'll say it a million times. And that is perfectly fine. But if you find that you want to make changes in life, it is never too late. So if you have a child that has had unlimited access and maybe it got really out of control, there's no shame in that. Okay, we're not perfect. We're human. And now you're feeling like, oh gosh, there's consequences to this. I want to make changes. That's okay. Little incremental steps will go a long way. Like we talked about the modeling, having boundaries and having conversations, and then reflecting on the positive things when you see like, oh gosh, you were like way funner to be around today. I noticed that you weren't on your phone as much. We actually went out and we had a really great time together. That really builds a child up too. And so it kind of builds that confidence and like I said, those skills that they're going to carry. So it's okay. Be patient with yourself, grace, all of that, but also it's never too late.
Yeah. I think that's such an important thing to remember as parents. Like give yourself grace.
100%.
Every single day we're making mistakes, and have grace with your kids too.
Yes.
As they make mistakes and learn life. We were kids once too, and I could probably I don't want to remember all of the things that I did. But well, thank you so much, Shauna, for being here.
Yes.
I think you gave parents a lot of things to take away and hopefully practice within their homes, within their families. So appreciate you being here.
Great. Thank you.